Welcome. My name is Ben Christensen, and I'm the owner of the Waterford Wine Company. And it's my great pleasure today to talk to you about the wines of Napa Valley. Now, I should point out that at our tastings, if we all show up on time, we get to have a bonus wine. So we started on a bonus wine of Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. And if you look closely, you can actually see that I did spill a little bit on my shirt already. So if you're at home and this happens to you, don't worry about it at all. Now, why Napa Sauvignon Blanc? Well, I thought it would be a great introduction to the valley, and I realized the valley is really oriented much more towards something else, Cabernet. And that's actually going to be the subject of everything that we're going to talk about from here. But Sauvignon Blanc performs an important role, and I think really since the 1960s and the invention of Fumé Blanc by Robert Parker has become the second grape variety of Napa, so it's one that I didn't want to ignore. For us, Sauvignon Blanc from Napa Valley comes in a slightly different form than other areas. Maybe New Zealand is the most famous, where you get lots of grapefruit and passion fruit aromas out of it. To me, Napa Sauvignon Blanc is always more stone-fruited, and then it was Robert Mondavi that first started putting new oak on Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, giving you a richness, a roundness of texture, and of course changing the flavors a little bit. Now that may have been an amazing invention of Robert Mondavi, or it may have just been happenstance that he needed it to happen, but Sauvignon Blanc does one thing for the valley that Cabernet doesn't, which is that Sauvignon Blanc can actually return a profit very quickly. Nowadays, we think of Napa Valley as something else and maybe a playground for billionaires, and we're going to talk about that very shortly. But back in Robert Mondavi's day, when he was trying to, really, I think he would say this, give birth to a wine and culture that wasn't there and had been destroyed by Prohibition, he needed money. And Sauvignon Blanc, with its ability to be harvested, then fermented and turned into wine, and then bottled and sold to market, really within a year, gave him the cash flow that many of the valley's most famous Cabernets just can't achieve because they take about 3 years to market. So that's our intro bonus wine, something to consider when you're there. Also, if you're a foodie at all, I'll tell you, this style of Sauvignon Blanc goes perfect with California cuisine. I think it's almost always an ideal match. So something to consider. Now, that all being said, let's just take a little bit and talk about the logistics of this tasting. We're going to do this tasting in a series of flights. We're going to have 3 wines each flight. In the first flight, we're going to explore the Napa Valley AVA and what it means. In the second flight, we're going to look back on the history of Napa Valley. And in the third flight, we're going to expound on those a little bit, but also explore winemaking styles. For you who are watching this, we of course would love to have you purchase each and every single bottle of all of these flights, which is why if you go to waterfordwine.com, you can find this tasting, Napa Cabernet. All of the wines will be listed, and you can use the coupon code Napa Cabernet to get a discount off of all of these wines. Now, Napa is not the cheapest place in the world to be buying wines, so maybe you can just buy 1, 2, or all 3 per flight. Maybe you want to do all 9 or 10 with the bonus wine all at once, or maybe you want to piecemeal it out. The code will work any way you want to do it, and you can choose how then you watch these presentations. That being said, I think it's always fun to taste back and forth and go back and forth between these wines, and we've got a couple little Easter eggs for you on the website as well to explore if you want to. All right, with that being said, I think the big question we can ask ourselves is, what do we mean when we say Napa Valley? Now, Napa Valley, what we mean is something quite technical, and I think the Napa Valley Vintners Association would really want you to know this. What we mean, Napa Valley, is actually the Napa Valley AVA. Sorry, my board's a little bit wiggly, so my handwriting's a little bit funny. What is an AVA? It is a legal term. It is done by the US government, and it's called the American Viticultural Area. Now, I think the idea behind it is that in some way, the wines that hold an AVA name on their label, we can make an assumption about taste and we can also make an assumption about quality. Now, I'm guessing some of you are now thinking, hey, wait a second, this sounds a little bit like the French terminology of terroir, and it also sounds kind of European in Europe's schemes of AOCs and DOCs. And why are we taking that and applying it to what is the heart and soul of American Cabernet? I think there's a couple of good answers to that. One is, you already know this. I can tell by purchases in my store that Napa Valley is one of the most famous names worldwide. So even if you don't want to say it's an AVA, you already know that Napa Valley is world famous for its wines. And so the legal definition here fits and kind of sanctifies it. Indeed, the Napa Valley Vintners Association has had lots of legal affairs over this designation that still go on today, of both what it means geographically to be in the AVA, and also, this sounds funny, but what it means to be a winery in the AVA. So it's a much fought after and protected name and meaningful to the people who are making wine in it. The other thing that I think it's important to note is you are already paying for this. You're of course not paying for the name, but you as consumers of Napa Valley Cabernet are willing to pay a lot. And you're willing to pay a lot more if it says Napa Valley and Napa Valley Cabernet on it. By and large, you're willing to pay double the price of a Cabernet that doesn't say Napa Valley. So it has a clear economic influence to American consumer habit, which I think is a good reason to start with it. Okay, so the importance being established, well, what does it mean for us? And how can we actually ground it down into the flavors of the wine? I think there are a couple great ways to do this, and also to think about how the flavors will come together. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about before we embark is, and you'll see it on the website, the cost of the wines. I already told you that you're willing to pay double for a Napa Valley wine, but these wines, of course, are fairly significantly expensive, and some of them are sky high in their expense. Well, is that because the market can bear it, and so wineries will charge as much as they can? Yeah, certainly that's part of it. But there's another reason too. And the other reason is, let me draw some geography and let's take a taste of this first wine together too. The other reason is that grapes grown within the Napa Valley AVA are worth a lot. Let me do instant cartography, see if my board can hold up here. I'll give you California. There you go, California, and Napa Valley sits right here at the top of the bay, right? The San Pablo Bay, Napa Valley. Okay, now Napa Valley should not be confused with Napa County, which is a little bit larger. Napa County also actually has its own AVA for wine as well, but you don't see it as much. Napa Valley encompasses much of it, and it's the prized one, so producers have every reason to try and do Napa Valley. Now let me blow up that little box a little bit more and show you Napa Valley spread out. And of course, now you can go online and find all these maps, but I love being silly and doing instant cartography. So if this is the bottom of San Pablo Bay, what you've got in Napa Valley is kind of an arc going up valley like that. And of course, it's a valley, so it sits between two mountain ranges. One is the Mayacamas, and the other is the Vacas mountain range. Now, the Napa Valley AVA actually encompasses a little bit more, which is why when you look on your maps online, you're going to see other stuff up in this mountain region tucked in there as well, fitting under the Napa Valley designation. Okay, here's the thing, and it's something to think about as you taste these wines, and I can tell you it guides winemakers quite a lot. One of the golden rules of thumb in winemaking is if you want to make a wine and you want to know the price you need to hit retail, kind of simple business plan tactics for a winery, You just take the price, you take the price of the tonnage of grapes that you're buying, so the price per ton of grapes that you're buying, you divide it by 100, and that gives you what the retail price of the wine has to be. Now, if we step outside of Napa Valley, maybe there are places in California, maybe in Central Valley somewhere, we can buy Cabernet at $300 a ton, which means that our retail price then becomes $3. Again, just a simple equation for winemakers to think about. Well, as of 2016, I was talking to the lead winemaker at Groth, a long-standing, wonderful Napa Valley winery, and he was giving a presentation, and he said as of 2015, so he was presenting in 16, the average price per Cabernet ton in Napa Valley was actually $5,500 a ton, which means that your Napa Cabernet has to start at $55 a bottle. Otherwise, something else is going on. He also further went and said he was in charge, he retired soon after, he was in charge of purchasing some fruit. Groth has estate vineyards, but they buy in some fruit. And he said as of that date, he had not seen any Napa Cabernet grapes that he would be willing to buy that came in under $7,700 a ton, meaning that the average bottle now has to be $78 a bottle. So this is a very, very expensive place to be buying grapes. It gives rise to a cultural difference, I think, that we'll see, but it also means that wineries that have owned their land for a long time are probably making less expensive wine. Wineries that haven't owned their land for a long time or don't own land at all and have to purchase all their fruit are probably going to end up making more expensive wine. It's a consideration from when you start drinking Napa Valley wines. Okay, that being said, let's try and get to the flavors of these guys and work through this system of AVA more. Now, if you're willing to buy that Napa Valley AVA is important, I'd also like to further that and say that Napa Valley has sub-AVAs within it, nested AVAs, if you will. The idea, again, being that wines that state the AVA name on the label also have a certain flavor profile that we can associate with them, and probably that we know and love. There are a couple of easy ones to put on the map because they're fairly famous. Tucked down here, different color, Stag's Leap District, famous because Warren Winarski was there. And then up here, you get Rutherford and Oakville. Now, there are a couple of others, and I'll start to fill them in as we go along, but I just wanted to start you with three. Some people don't want to sit and memorize all of Napa AVAs, but I think these three are worth knowing immediately. Now, one thing we can know for sure is when we go from down valley to up valley, down here, Carneros, up there, the town of Calistoga, we are actually gaining in heat. So our heat summation is going up, and it's generally much warmer at the top of the valley. So Stag's Leap District has another district right beside it called Oak Knoll. Now, Oak Knoll is an interesting one because, of course, some people make Cabernet in Oak Knoll still, but it's always a little bit cooler than the rest. And to me, the Cabernet there comes across as just slightly greener. And at this day and age, a lot of Americans won't tolerate a greenness to their Napa Cab profile. So by and large, I think Oak Knoll has switched to other varieties. And certainly down here at the bottom in Carneros, this is no longer Napa Cab country, which is why we're not going to talk about it that much, because it's Pinot Noir and Chard country. Okay, though, let's go to the heart of the situation, and let's talk about Rutherford. And that's our first bottle here, Michael Honig's Napa Cabernet Rutherford. I always think this is just an absolutely extraordinary exemplar of Napa Valley Cabernet. Why? Because I think when we drink Napa Valley Cabernet, we're looking for a strong, strong presence of black fruit and blue fruit. That's fully ripened American Sunshine Cabernet showing off on the nose immediately. A rich black fruit, no greenness to it, and gorgeous. The other thing I think we look for is a beautiful, you might even say luxurious kind of baking spice note to the wine as well. That's, of course, complementary new oak, and usually now new French oak being applied to the wines. Together, giving you this harmonious, big, full-bodied, round, or big, full-nosed wine that I think every American ends up enjoying at some point in their life. Then on the palate, when you have it on the palate, I think you can sense a couple of things which are strongly desired in Napa Cabernet. One is that the palate is full-bodied. It's not like Bordeaux where you might have some underripeness. It is a big-bodied wine, gives you a lot of fruit. But it's also not like other Cabernets in that it's got some texture. And that texture, I think, comes across in, if you'll bear with me, a sense of dusty tannins to it, a muscularity, if you will. And a lot of Napa Cab drinkers who I think get really interested in Napa Cab want to feel those tannins. It's not like they're totally dried out because they're coupled with the sweet fruit, and I think this is what people mean when they say integrated, but they want to have that mouthfeel to the wine. If we go to another location in California, Paso Robles, it simply, to my palate, never develops that muscularity in its Cabernet. It's Napa where you get that as its home. Now, for us tasting right here now, we just opened this bottle of wine, so I can tell you it's a little bit closed down. And what I would suggest to you is that if you're doing this tasting, take it slow. I would say have this wine open for 2 hours, and its palate is really gonna broaden out to you, really flesh out, and show you what's going on at Honig. Now, I want to complicate this story of Napa Valley AVAs because these are organized north to south, and they're organized in heat summation. And that's one way to work it, and I suppose I should put the most famous ones in here. We'll do St. Helena and Calistoga up here. There are more, and there are more coming, but at least we've got our map a little bit filled in. But what I'd like to do is slice the Napa Valley pie another way. And the other way I'd like to slice the Napa Valley pie is to think about its soil types, and then also to think about how sunlight works across the valley. Now, why do that as opposed to this, or in addition to this? It's because I think it gives us strong clues that Mother Nature provides to us for why these wines taste the way they do. And I actually still think, even though Napa Valley is the area where you have just thousands upon thousands of the most talented winemakers in the world, I do think Mother Nature still plays her part. There is a reason I started you with Michael Honig's wine, and that reason is because of Rutherford. Now, Rutherford and Michael Honig's Cabernet here sit on what's known as the Rutherford Bench. Oddly enough, the Rutherford Bench is some of the most important land in Napa Valley, but it doesn't have its own AVA. If you look at, simply Google the most expensive wines in Napa Valley, many of them will be sitting on this area called the Rutherford Bench. And you'll see that the Rutherford Bench, my map is of course entirely to scale, the Rutherford Bench spans up into Oakville. Now the Rutherford Bench soil type is an alluvial soil type. And that alluvial soil type simply means that it's the runoff from the volcanic side of the mountains, but is not the valley floor. It also happens to be a bench, meaning it's about halfway upslope. All that to me means that the water is going to drain off quickly and that the soil is harder for the vines to dig into and work. The other thing is he is sitting on the Rutherford Bench, which gets the morning sun, which is not as diffuse as the afternoon sun, and then by the time it passes overhead, it's not contributing as much heat. What that all means to me is you can get beautiful blue and black fruit character to it, but you can feel the alluvial benchland in the tannins. You can feel them, and to me, I'll use the term that winemakers say, which is the Rutherford dust. And in fact, there's a Rutherford Dust Society within Napa Valley, winemakers who make wine from there. And I firmly believe that it's the alluvial soil that's giving you that character to the tannin profile of the wines. I think it's a fascinating way to take the valley. Now, in contrast, let's move on to Clos de Val. Clos de Val is based down in Stag's Leap District, and they do make exclusively estate Stag's Leap District wines. To my understanding, this is not exclusively estate. So it's sourced from the valley, but I think as of the 2014 vintage, they converted almost dominant to estate fruited wines. I think when you smell this thing, there are a couple of interesting things you can note, particularly if you're going to double fist with the Honig wine. One of the most immediate things that I think you can note is you have here a cool blue fruit character. Now, all these descriptions are mine. I think if you do open up these two at the same time, you'll notice that they smell different and taste different. However you want to describe them is just fine. But to me, the Clos de Val has a cool blue fruit character to the wine, and it has just a little hint of springness to it, maybe just a little bit of green character to it. I actually find that super pretty, and I think it relates to the place that this winery is from, Stag's Leap District, which is much further to the south. Even though these drives are short, the heat matters, and so this wouldn't get as much heat to it. Then on the palate, when you taste it, I think a couple of things become present to me. One is that the fruit character gets a little bit more red fruited, a little bit more cherry to it. The other thing is that the wine is softer, if you will, and shows off its acidity just a touch more. Now, these are all degrees of narrowness. We're in a category that's Napa Cab, so these are degrees of narrowness, but I think you can notice them. And here with that red fruit character, and then particularly with the softness of the tannins versus the dustiness of the tannins, we get the other soil type that's going on in Napa Valley. And the other soil type is a fluvial soil type. And I think of it as just fluid or flow. What it is the total runoff of the valley. So it's not on benchlands, and it's soil that might have at one point been underwater, been in the river system that makes up the valley because there is a Napa River. So that soil type dominates the middle of the valley, and that's called the valley floor. And you'll hear producers talk about it. I think it's always interesting because I think you can sense valley floor wines simply based on their tannin character, meaning that they're softer, more supple. I will tell you that most valley floor wines are less expensive to purchase fruit from than alluvial soil types or on the benchlands, either the east or the west. So you could say it's not as prized as the other fruit that we just tasted, but on the other hand, this is Napa Valley, so everything is already really valuable. Our final soil type, I think, will also show itself in the glass, and that soil type is volcanic. Now, what is volcanic? Well, this is a mountain system, these two up here, and they span the whole range. And of course, if it's a mountain system, it means that it once had volcanic activity. Now, the one we're tasting here is from Snowdon. So here's Snowdon, and it's called The Ranch. I wanted to show you Snowdon because probably it sits between two of the most famous mountain AVAs. I can stick them in here. One is coming up soon, hopefully, and that one would be right here, Pritchard Hill. And then the other one, which does exist, is Howell Mountain. So it sits, their ranch sits right between those two AVAs, so it only takes the Napa designation. On the other hand, it is up in our volcanic soil type, and I think it really displays it. How does it display it? I think you can sense it on the nose. It's got this kind of black fruit character, but it's not the open fruit of the Honig. It's kind of got a density to it. It's almost got a little bit of, like it was Syrah with just a little bit of animal going on to it. And I always think that volcanic soil types and mountain Cabernet can get just a little bit wild, but in a good way. The other thing is when you have this one on the palate, I feel like The volcanic and mountain Cabernet, same thing, always display a level of huge developed tannins. And it's not the dusty tannins of the Rutherford where they can get integrated with the fruit. It's a tannin character that really stands out as profound and part of the driving force of the wine. Now, maybe I should take a step back and say, if it sounds like I'm trying to choose one wine over the other, I don't think that's the case. With the tannin structure of wines like Snowden on mountain volcanic soil, they're wines that are going to be very, very long-lived in your cellar. And that tannin structure is what keeps them very long-lived. And I think with time become very profound. The Clos de Val, with its little bit of greenness, I'll say my experience has been that that greenness over time, a couple of years in bottle, will become a violet character and match perfectly with the cherry fruit that's going on in the wine. And the Honig, with those dusty tannins, I think they'll eventually solve down, become also super harmonious. So here, 3 Napa Cabernets and a couple different ways to divide Napa. The system of AVAs that you can look up, an idea of soil types being valley floor with fluvial, benchland with alluvial, and then mountain fruit character. Mountain fruit coming from both sides of the valley. And finally, we talked about it a little bit, but the way light affects. Over on this side, it's always going to be slightly more pure light and also slightly less heat because it passes overhead, whereas over here, you're going to have a lot more heat. So as you go up valley and as you look at the Bacchus range, you're going to develop more concentrated wines.